I'd like to actually start this conversation about the value of data by asking you two questions by a show of hands. How many of you think that your company's data is valuable? Raise your hand. There's a lot of hands up right now. Second question, raise your hand if you fully understand the economic and financial value of your data. That's not many. And that's one of the reasons that EMC a couple years ago launched a research project to more fully understand this phenomena of the economic value of data. And this is what we learned. A couple years ago, we partnered with Capgemini, and we did a global survey asking our customers what they thought about data and analytics. And one of the things they said was really interesting. 63% of the respondents felt that the monetization of data would become more important than the selling of the actual products that they produced. And there's a quote up here from Australia Oil and Gas. They would do GIS surveys for the purpose of discovering their product, oil. But what they found was that the data that they collected in their search of oil, they began to sell or market and raise money for their company. And we're seeing this all over the industry. For example, the French racket maker Babolat has been making tennis rackets for over 100 years. It's a one-time sale, and they get the revenue from that tennis racket. They've inserted a sensor into the bottom of their tennis racket that spits data out. And now they're getting a stream of additional revenue that goes beyond the revenue that they're getting through the selling of the tennis racket. There's another company in Sweden, Lat Materiet. Similarly, they gather GIS data solely for the purpose of generating maps that they sell. But they're also realizing that they can take that same data and generate additional revenue by selling it to lawyers, by selling it to the government, by selling it to landowners. So when we noticed this phenomena a couple years ago, we decided to start a research project with the San Diego Supercomputer Center. And there's really two things we're trying to understand. Number one, what are the important business processes that each company should be putting in place so that they can accurately calculate the value of their data? And number two, as a vendor of IT infrastructure, what are some of the infrastructure changes that would need to be put in place for those business processes to use as they try and access the data? So this presentation today is really in two parts. Number one, what are some of the emerging business processes that we're starting to see in the industry? And number two, as a business owner, what are some of the things that you should be doing in your own business to prepare yourself for this concept of data valuation in order to bring the biggest benefit to your business? So let's take a look at some of the business processes. We've got 5 business processes that we're starting to see. First of all, if you take a look at last year's acquisition of lynda.com by LinkedIn, LinkedIn spent $1.5 billion acquiring lynda.com. And according to their CEO, the primary reason that they bought the company was actually for the data. They wanted those training videos so that LinkedIn customers can achieve certification. So if the primary reason for buying lynda.com was actually the videos, let's say 90% of the acquisition was based on data, we estimated that they spent $112 per gigabyte purchasing those video assets. Is that overpaid or underpaid? And the answer is nobody knows, because we don't have standards in the industry. Another great example of a business process happens during bankruptcy. In Las Vegas, Caesar's Palace is going through bankruptcy proceedings. Out of every asset that Caesar's Palace has, their total rewards loyalty program, their customer database, has been valued at $1 billion. That data is more valuable than Caesar's Palace combined real estate and buildings holdings. Now there's disagreement, right, between the creditors and Caesar's Palace on the actual value of that database, but the point is made. It's the most important asset that Caesar's Palace has. Another great example of a business process involving valuation is data monetization. So there's a company, 23andMe. Many of you have heard of them. Perhaps some of you have ordered their DNA kits. DNA kits are their product. They sell them for $99 a piece. And if you look at how many they've sold since 2006, it's a significant portion of their revenue. A biotech company, Genentech, approached them and said, I will give you $10 million if you give me access to your DNA database. And if our testing and our analytics go well, then I will give you up to another $50 million for access. And all of a sudden, without selling one more product, they've created 75% of the total revenue that they did in their first few years of their existence. The sale of data. We have someone at EMC that actually buys data sets. Here's a great example of a company, a grocer in the UK called Tesco. Tesco needed to raise money, and they looked at all the assets that they had in their corporation, and they recognized that they had a division within Tesco called dunnhumby that has the purchasing habits of 770 million shoppers, and they sold this data set for $900 million to Kroger. And the last example of a business process would be data insurance. Companies like TJX are worried about cyber breaches. They're worried about data loss. They go get an insurance policy from a company like Liberty Mutual, who has seen a 30% increase in the number of policies they've written over the last few years. Liberty Mutual has to go into companies like TJX, and they have to assign a value that they will pay out should that data be lost or should that data be stolen. So there are plenty of examples in the industry, and you need to think about this for your own company and the data that you own. So how do you get started? Right, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out a couple years ago, most companies have better accounting for their office furniture than they do for their data assets. So we're at the beginning of something. And as a matter of fact, this is the first time that EMC has spoken on this topic in the United States, so you've got a head start on how to prepare for understanding the value that your data has. So we really feel that there's 5 pillars, 5 activities that your company should be thinking about to prepare yourself for the inevitability of calculating the value of their data. You need to predictably spot new opportunities. You need to innovate in an agile way. You need to demonstrate transparency and trust with your data. You need to be providing your customers with a unique, personalized experience. And finally, your infrastructure needs to be always on, operating in real time. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about each one of these before we finish up. So if you want to predictably spot new opportunities using your valuable data, your company needs to understand something called the analytic life cycle. You need to create the position of a chief data officer, data scientists, data engineers, and you need to train them on this approach. How to create analytic plans, how to discover the data that you need and whether or not you have it in your corporation and whether or not you need to buy it from somewhere else, how to write analytic models, how to actually run those models, generate visualizations, and then present the results of your analytics back to the executives that will make decisions to either raise money, revenue, or cut costs in your organization. The faster your organization is able to spin around this wheel, the more valuable the data will become. So that's step number one. If you want to predictably spot new revenue or cost-saving opportunities for your customers, you really need to learn this analytic life cycle. The second step is agility in application deployment. If you look at companies like Netflix, how long does it take Netflix to come up with an idea and push it out running on Netflix's infrastructure so you can view it on your tablet or your laptop? They can come up with an idea in the morning and have it running and you're viewing it by lunch. And if it's not working properly, they can back it out immediately. So this ability to actually shrink down the time it takes from all the steps of going from idea to software development, to testing, to integration, to deployment in a live production environment, it is critical that you reduce the amount of time that that takes. And the faster that your business can generate new applications, the more unique, feature-rich data you'll be collecting from your consumers and the more value your corporate customer can have. Gartner has estimated that 75% of companies will do their own application development because it's competitive advantage. If you want to out-execute your competition, you're going to have to learn how to write and deploy applications quickly that are compelling for your customers. The next piece of advice that I have for you is that you must demonstrate transparency and trust in your handling of data. You may be a startup that's decided to store all of your data in the cloud. You might not be sure whether or not that cloud provider is actually keeping all of the data privacy regulations that are important in your geography. As your business scales globally, you will bump into other data privacy laws and regulations, and if you don't obey them, the data that you're storing actually has a negative value in terms of the amount of fines and regulatory fees that you may pay. So one of the opportunities that your company has is to use frameworks for storing data where it's classified as it enters your corporation or your business, and as it's classified, depending on how sensitive it is, it's stored on lower or higher levels of data protection. So classifying your data as it flows into your business and properly storing it with an adequate level of protection and enforcement of regulations is key for protecting yourself against negative data value. Fourthly, it's critical that you hire a user experience team, UX team. Your competitors are trying to create and collect data from customers by using compelling user interfaces. And one of the best ways for you to collect data from your consumers and your customers is having a killer user experience team that knows how to put your company's value in a small mobile device or a tablet or a laptop. The better that this experience is, the more rich data that you collect. So what we're recommending here is that if you don't have a user experience team in your organization, we recommend that you go to a company like Pivotal, for example, which teaches pairwise programming with experts and user experience designers to build the best and more compelling user interfaces for the industry. And finally, fifthly, store your data well in an environment that's always on and operates in real time. So as you create the position of a chief data officer, as you create user experience team, as you have data scientists in your organization churning through and calculating the value of data, you have to have a new type of infrastructure called a data lake that makes it very easy to create analytic sandboxes, to do data experiments in, to do data validation and data curation in. You can't just build a standard IT infrastructure to do this type of work. So store it well by using data lake technology. And I'd like to wrap up by saying a number of things. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your attention. As you can see, this research is new. And if you're interested, I noticed a lot of you taking pictures of the slides today. My Twitter handle is Steve Todd. And if you go to my Twitter handle today, I actually wrote a blog post that contained all of the information that I just said on the stage today, because I'm very interested in connecting you in to the research on this project. So whether you can connect with me on Twitter, whether you want to leave a comment for me on my blog post, I've put the location here of the EMC booth in location D2. We actually have a sign-up sheet. If any of you are interested in coming together for a workshop on data value, talking about the business processes, talking about the IT infrastructure, we held our first data value workshop in San Diego in January. Of course, I'd encourage you after this talk is over to attend the cybersecurity panel, because it's closely tied to data value. And one of my colleagues from RSA will actually be speaking at that panel as well. And then finally, in closing, I'd love to just touch base with you at my book signing at 4:10 p.m. I've written a book about global innovation, given my title at EMC Corporation as Vice President of Strategy and Innovation. Would love to chat with you face-to-face, or just see you around, or perhaps I'll meet you on the beach. Okay? Thank you, everybody.